Wow, quite an intro. A suffragist, right. So, I think every presentation should have a little bit of Beyonce. So they say a picture says 1,000 words. How many of you watched the YouTube live stream of Beyonce at Coachella? My God, did you hear about it? Okay, good. You're forgiven. So I was glued to my screen. I casted YouTube up onto my living room screen, sat there with my kids, and were transfixed as she came out on stage and performed at Coachella. What an incredible moment. I mean, she is and represents, I think, everything that's fabulous. She's brave, she's bold, she's creative, she's sassy, she's sexy, she's strong, and she's powerful. And we all want to be a little bit Beyonce. And I sat there with my kids and I thought about the fact that what they looked at and they saw in her was the idea that they could be anything. They can be her and everything that she represents in terms of that power. What an incredible visual moment that was. Those images have the ability to change the way we think. So there were some neuroscientists at MIT who've done a study that have proven that it takes only 13 milliseconds for our brain to process an image. I don't even know how fast 13 milliseconds is, but I'm assuming it's insanely fast. So our brain can look at an image, it extracts meaning from it, and it makes a decision about what it's seen. To give it some context, it takes us 600 milliseconds to find a word, think about that meaning, get the correct grammar, and say it out loud. It probably takes me a lot longer than 600 milliseconds, but I'm assuming that's the average. So our brains process so much. We work in images. We are influenced by what we see and how it makes us think about the world, about what we might be able to be. Might take you longer to process the next image, but hey. That's me, 4 years old, bravely putting that up there. And actually was taken probably not long before I had a moment when I had managed to use an entire bar of soap and most of the shampoo in the bath, as my mum came in and said, "What are you doing, Nishma?" I literally rubbed my skin quite sore. And I said, "I'm trying to rub the brown off, Mummy, because the little kids said I'm not the same as them." And at 4 years old, I didn't felt I belonged. And as I grew up, I continued to think the things that I loved, the media. I was an absolute magazine junkie. There were only 3 channels and no internet. I am that old. But everything I saw didn't reflect me. I couldn't see myself in those images. I couldn't see what I could be. I dreamt and had ideals. That's, actual real life back of a folder like you did when you're little and you cut out pictures and you stick things and dream. But I never saw myself in anything I could do. And it was hard and probably not surprising then that when the careers I wanted to go into and the things I wanted to do, my parents and others around me would say, "That's not for you. You don't belong in that. That's not where you can be." So the power of an image changes the way we think about the world, about our ambitions as well, around who we can be and what we can do. So when this ad came out, everyone's probably way too young to remember this, but I remember being a young girl and seeing Benetton were an incredible fashion brand, really pushing the barriers. And when they released this campaign, and many campaigns actually through the 80s and 90s, of a far more diverse group of models, I remember being really excited, thinking, look, there's someone a bit like me. It can be me. I can be part of the world. I do belong. And it has a powerful impact on us. Those images change the way we think. So at Google, we really do believe that the essence of our business, the mission of our business, is for everyone. It's in the mission statement that was very first written by Larry and Sergey about making the world's information universally accessible and available to everyone. So that means for everyone, really does mean for everyone. It means the work that we're doing very much in developing countries at the moment is all about how can we bring the world to everyone. Google's 20 years old this year. I know, surprised me as well. 20 years old. And the thing is with that is you kind of think, gosh, look at what's happened in 20 years. In 20 years, the world seems smaller than it's ever been. We are more diverse. Remember, if you think about all the types of cuisine, the food, the restaurants, the clothes, the things you can see and do, it's so much more diverse than we've ever had. And technology has played a big part in helping the world to become just that little bit smaller for us. It's nothing that certainly when I was young and I was first growing up, I couldn't have imagined the world that we live in today. But the one thing that hasn't kept pace, and quite significantly so, is actually when we look at visual references, whether it's in commercial or consumer use, they haven't kept pace. They don't reflect this wonderful, as Karen said, fruit salad of a world and a country and certainly a city that we live in. It doesn't reflect it. And you have to kind of dig in to say, why is that the case? Why do we not see that when we know that images have such a big impact on what we see and do? And the reality is as we search for more images, whether it's through the image libraries that are created or through Google search and Google Images, which simply can reflect what's already out there, you can see how strong the bias is by the images that are created and put out in the world. So, you can play along with me. What do you think I searched for when I got this back? I searched for, I got searched for female secretary. Which, I mean, I'm not sure, one of them's definitely not getting any work done. That's for sure. What do you think I searched for here?
Creative director.
Creative director. And what about this one? This was black creative director. Which I'm pretty sure some of those people are not black, even by the standard of those pictures. So if that's what we're finding when we go in and search image libraries or Google image search, that's what we're reflecting back. It's not the reality. And we have to change this because of the impact it has on us. Now, there was a brilliant piece written quite recently in The Guardian, a great bit of investigative journalism around the whitewash of magazines. And having said I was a magazine junkie when I was little, I was very much influenced by what you go and see. And that is a very recent shot of a magazine stand in a shop. And the reality is this study showed that of the 214 magazines that were published, less than 10% of them featured a black or Asian person on the front cover. Actually, it kind of went crazy in October, because in October there were 3 magazines at the same time. 2 had a black person, 1 had an Asian person. In May and March, something really weird happened, and there was not a single person of any colour on any of those 214 magazines. Think about the impact that has on someone who looks at those and says, I don't see me, I don't belong. And that's the sense we do. The danger here is not just about fairness and equality, it's about the messages that we give to communities and our social life. It's a sense of, I don't belong. I feel like I don't belong. But more worryingly, particularly when we look at the tensions that we have in the world that we live in today, it makes others think that I don't belong. So the power of the images in all of our media shapes our behaviour, not just for those that feel underrepresented, but it shapes the behaviour of how we think of others. And you go behind the scenes and you can understand why. This isn't just complacency, but the fact is that 94% of journalists are white, compared to 91% of the working population. But when you look at where most of those journalists are based, which is in London, actually 60% of the working population in London is white. So we have a challenge, not just in gender, but in ethnicity and in other diversity, that are not reflected in the teams who are then creating the work. In books, so children's books, I'm a mum to 2 kids, and I had not paid enough attention to this till I saw some research. The fact that across children's media, this was slightly more than books, only 19.5%, so less than 20% of females have a job or a career. I'd like to kind of give you a little bit of a notice here. The prince doesn't always arrive, so don't wait for them. But the idea that children's media and children's books, particularly when they're concerned with girls, was a suggestion that you didn't need a job and a prince was going to come and sweep you off your feet and it was all going to be fine. So we're from a young age, not only through the images we're doing, but the stories we're telling our kids, actually we're giving them a suggestion that there isn't that balance, there isn't that equality. So all of this, and there are stacks and stacks of evidence I could have given you, requires action. And personally, for me, my watershed moment was a few years ago. I had the privilege of meeting Gina Davis. I was previously the chair of Women at Google, which is our community group, very much about furthering our own women, but also looking at what we can do beyond Google and influencing change that needs to happen. And when I met Gina Davis, who has an incredible organisation that looks at diversity in film and media, she shared all this data with me, and I was horrified by what I saw, not just in children's media, but across the board. The fact that female directors, film directors, actresses, the crew behind, the stylists, the art directors, it was a common thread across all of them, the minorities that existed, and there was simply not enough women there. At Google, we feel passionately about this, along many, not just in tech, but in a broader sense, because we know that actually the influence of the creative work and people who work in creative industries has the opportunity to change the world. So we worked with the Gina Davis Institute, and not surprisingly, with Google, we started with data first. And we had a look at saying, well, is there anything we could do? Because she'd been gathering all this data, looking at films, looking at content to understand the bias that existed. So our machine learning engineers worked with the University of South California to look at her data, see if we could try and make some understanding of what they found, but also speed up the process. It was quite a long and laborious process. And what we've done and we've created is this idea of the Gina Davis inclusion quotient. So here we can now, it doesn't take months now to review film and content, we can do it in real time, and we can highlight not just how many male and female actors there are in a film, but within microseconds understand when they speak, how long they speak, and also when I'm looking at actually what they say. Not surprisingly, what we found was that men were twice more likely to appear in films than women. Anyone have a hazard a guess at what was the only genre of film and content where women appear on screen more than men? Horror. Who wants a horror movie? Poor women. I hate horror films. I was like, wow, that's the only one we get in. And the fear of this is obviously not just what it does, but it's like, what does it say to us? It also showed that films that have a strong female lead do much better at the box office, 16% higher in terms of the turnover, of the delivery that they make at the box office when we have female-led films. So using this data, Gina Davis and others are trying to challenge and change the creative industries to recognize what's being done, proving fact and proving what it can be success. Because ultimately, diversity isn't an altruistic thing. This is about business, it's about economy, it's about success. So we've also used the data to look at, last year, working with the Gina Davis Institute and Cannes Lions, they looked at entries to have a look at the bias in advertising. And the fact that of the work that had been entered, only 25% of those ads featured men on screen only, compared to 5% of ads that feature only a woman on screen. The fact that we could see that same bias coming through, again, similar to what we were seeing in film. So we know the facts and the data then, and you're all the enlightened ones, you know and see this, but it's about what can we do. Now, the machine learning and those engineers, those are kind of big tasks that Google can do, but we also believe, and we empower all of our staff with the idea that everyone can make a difference. Doesn't matter how small it is, but actually we all have within us the power to make a change. So one thing that I've done, which is slightly closer to home, and actually working with Karen on this, is we got involved and got behind some incredible people who had said, well, if all the images are saying one thing, why don't we change it? Why don't we create a new library of content? Why don't we try and push out different images? So working with a wonderful team, the So White Project, so people like Selma and Nadia and Natalie, who just got off their backside and said, let's make a change, went out and shot lots of diverse images, pushed it out to media to create awareness of the bias that we have. And hugely successful. They went on, the images, the beautiful images that they created, as Karen said, this fruit salad of people that reflected in those images was actually then bought by Getty. And it's our one small way of continuing to push that change, which is really in the hands of all of us. Last year, these are my kids here, last year I had the pleasure of speaking, and if it all goes well this year, maybe, get in for a hat trick. But last year, my other little effort was I talked about the book Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. I had been blown away by the impact this book had had on my daughter, who the data again shows from a very young age, children already have a bias in terms of gender stereotyping roles. Books like this really change their idea of what's possible and what's available. The images, the stories, shaping them. In a year, I'm glad to say, they brought out a second volume, which does feature Beyonce. But actually, It doesn't create any more fights at bedtime because they can have one each, and my son reads it avidly, as does my daughter, and it's changed their perceptions of what's possible. But I'm delighted, and my push this year for a book this year is Stories for Boys Who Dare to Be Different, because it's as important that we're creating role models, the right role models for our sons as well as our daughters, because again, those images and stories change. The book includes incredible stories, everyone from Grayson Perry to Alan Turing and many others. And I've already seen a shift in the way that he thinks and my daughter thinks about what it is, what are the male role models and the opportunities available to them. And they read each other's books because they're learning from each other. And that's the opportunity we have. For them, they don't understand. It was the wonderful data we saw earlier from McCann there was the idea that actually we come into this and at their age, they don't understand. They find it confusing when I talk about some of these talks that I give because they hear, we don't see that unfairness. But what happens between then and they come into the workplace, our responsibility to change it here is really in our hands. Getty are doing wonderful work around challenging stereotypes. Gren creating more images to change the way we think. And we think about work and we think about our lives and trying to reflect the real world. Although, how many men do their hovering in their shorts, I don't know. But I love this. I think it's a great way of challenging norms because it is about breaking stereotypes. It is about the shock. You heard earlier from Vanessa and Priya, and the wonderful Edward Enninful is creating a revolution at Vogue in terms of what he's done. He's proved, so every time I meet a leader and say, I'm not really sure if I can make the change, well, in 6 months, he's built a new team, changed the face of that magazine, created diversity, and bring it forward. And under Radhika, Vanity Fair are similarly doing the same. But there's still so much more to be done. We have wonderful films that are showing a greater representation of people that are really having an impact on the world around us. And advertising. Advertising's moving in the right direction. I think the fact that actually this was some research done by Shutterstock showing that there has been a movement in the way that we think about ads. There has been a change and an attitude, but still so much, 51% of marketers now think it's important to represent modern day society. What about the other half? They still need to be enlightened and changed. I loved, and my thing is, we are seeing it in the work. My favourite campaigns this year is the Wieden & Kennedy's Londoner one. But again, when I first watched that, and I loved it, absolutely loved it, still do, I did strike me the fact that there were no Asian people in this. And it's about London. And if you look at the ethnicity makeup of London, 20% of London are from an Asian background, 13.7% are from a black background, and they weren't represented. So there's still more work to be done in truly reflecting what's happening. Similarly, the Nike campaign that was delivered by the wonderful team at Babyface, this was finding 10 incredible people and highlighting them from all different careers and walks of life, bringing this to the fore, changing the way we think about things. Or this wonderful campaign by Misguided, just recently launched, showing that sense of belonging again, that we all belong. This is about different skin conditions and psoriasis. Putting these images out for people to say, no, there is no normal. There is what is normal to one is not necessarily normal to the other, and their sense of belonging. And we, through advertising and creativity, can change the way we think about things. We can break the stereotypes. We have to challenge them. And it's not just about gender, and it's not just about race and ethnicity. Actually, last week was Mental Health Awareness Week. This image is one that's most closely associated with mental health. Yet actually, when you look at the conversations there, this is about breaking this stereotype and making the reality reflective of what it really is. So if we look to the future and I think about what's next, is the idea of you can create it and it's in our hands. I was really proud. Last week we had our big developer conference, it's called I.O., where we showcased the new technology. A lot of the people on stage were actually our female engineers. It's in their hands. They're building the technology and changing the way we're going to do things. When I think about AR and VR, reality is in the word there, augmented reality and virtual reality. Let it be a reality that reflects what we really see, because really that's in your hands to create. At Google, we don't believe that our role and responsibility as individuals and as a business is to create a platform and a stage for people to create, to use. We see a phenomenal change through YouTube, the amount of female film directors and storytellers there, but it's for you to kind of create and use our platform. We need to get out the way and let you have the chance to do that. And that's why we'll continue to support people like Ali and Creative Equals and Pip and Roshni and many others who are doing great work to support you. Thank you.